In what's sure to be a busy week around the NHL, the Edmonton Oilers have made their opening move, acquiring Trent Frederic from the Boston Bruins in a three-way trade on today's special bonus edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this bonus edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, breaking down the Trent Frederic trade. So we're going to go step by step. We'll look at it from just the Trent Frederic as a player. We'll do a little bit of a player profile. We're not going to go that deep. It won't be a full 30-minute episode about just Trent Frederic. We'll tackle the Evander Kane of it all, and then we'll tackle what I think is going to happen next. So starting out, when I first saw the trade, in my head I thought, oh, that's the Evander Kane replacement. I think they found a trade. And then I forgot that Trent Frederic was injured at the moment. And in theory, that means the Oilers could put Trent Frederic on LTIR for the remainder of the regular season. As of this morning, Trent Frederic was week to week as the Bruins had him listed before he was traded. So in theory, the Oilers acquire Trent Frederic because they had salary retained. The Devils got in there to retain some salary as well. Because of that, the Oilers will have enough cap space to put Trent Frederic on their active roster to put him on LTIR. If Trent Frederic can't return before the start of the playoffs, he would not count against their cap for the regular season. And that does not necessarily mean the Oilers are going to trade Evander Kane. My initial assumption was wrong because I had forgotten that Trent Frederic was injured. So with that said, Frederic is a former first-round pick of the Boston Bruins. And the Bruins, very much like the Oilers, slow play their prospects beyond belief because they've largely been super competitive over the last half decade. The Bruins have been a playoff staple for much of the post-2010 NHL. They've been a playoff team consistently. They've made a bunch of conference finals. They've made 2 Stanley Cup final appearances. They've had a President's Trophy winning season or 2. They've really built a strong foundation of guys. But one of the perils of that, of consistently being a Stanley Cup contender, is that you're constantly wheeling and dealing this time of year. And with that, that means you're not keeping your draft picks, and that means you're not keeping your prospects. So that means it's often difficult for those young guys to break through, to get playing time. And Frederic is no dissimilar. If you go and look at Trent Frederic's numbers, he played 15 games, 2018, 2019, the year they went to the Cup final and lost to the Blues. The year after that, he only got into 2 games. The year after that, 42. And he becomes a real NHL regular the following year, 2021, 2022 at 23. He plays 60 games. He may finish with more than 60 games if he can return this year. He's at 57 for the season so far. But with that in mind, that tells you a few things. Number one, it tells you that Frederic is relatively close to plateauing as a player because this is the age range where guys typically are what they are. When you're about to become an unrestricted free agent for the first time, like Frederic is, you have enough of a profile that the team that's drafted you or has had your rights for the last couple of years, if they feel you're a big piece, by that point, you're going to be playing 15, 16 minutes a night. You're going to get power play time or penalty kill time or both, depending on your skill sets. And Frederic's not that. If you go and look at just the ice time and you look at the playing time, who he plays with, 12 minutes this year at even strength, 51 seconds of power play, 26 seconds of penalty kill. His most common line mates, Charlie Coyle, Oliver Wahlstrom, Justin Brazeau. These are not David Pasternak and Brad Marchand or Elias Lindholm. That tells you very definitively where Frederic was in the Bruins pecking order. If I remember correctly, I'm going to click back over to my notes here. The 10th most commonly used forward for the Bruins. So this is somebody who's on the cusp of 3rd, 4th line. I think for the Oilers, I don't know what makes the most sense as far as sliding him in. I think skill set wise, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in the second segment where we compare him to Evander Kane and talk about it from that perspective. But The big thing, and the reason why I think the Oilers wanted Trent Frederick, I think there's a notion that the Oilers are a soft team, that they're easy to play against, that they are afraid to muck it up, they're afraid to slow the game down and work hard off the cycle. And that's an area where Trent Frederick excels. Trent Frederick's best traits are the fact that he's big, he's mobile, he can hit, and he can work off of the cycle. If you go and look on all three zones, the data tracking with transition stats, Frederick's best traits all come off of the cycle, where the Bruins would get the puck in deep, they'd maintain offensive zone time, they'd work the puck high to up to the point, down low, looking for big shots, rebounds, deflections to really kind of muck the game up. And that's not something I necessarily associate with the Oilers. I think if you were to talk about fit stylistically, it might be a bit awkward because the Oilers like to create so much off of the rush. They like to incorporate their defensemen into their offensive play, which often means defenseman's going to be left alone up high. It's going to put a lot more stress on that one guy who's up high to not make a mistake, to not mess up at the blue line. But at face value, I understand why the Oilers did this. They want to get a little more diverse in their skill sets. They currently feel their best forechecker being Podkolzin is not enough. And I agree. I think in an ideal world, you want to have a little bit of that sprinkled throughout your lineup. I think in an ideal world, Zach Hyman gives you a little bit of that as far as forechecking and creating off of the cycle as a McDavid complement. I think Podkolzin does that to a reasonable degree. I think Corey Perry does do that to a reasonable degree in a fourth line role, but he doesn't play enough. And if Evander Kane comes back and you have Trent Frederick, you have two more guys who are good at throwing around their bodies, blocking shots, hitting anything that moves, and creating offense. And because of that, you're giving yourself a little bit more of a diverse offensive profile. And that's really one of the keys to playoff success. And we know there's still 20 regular season games to go, about 5.5, 6 weeks of regular season games remaining. The Oilers are not really concerned about the regular season. This is a team who entered the season as the Stanley Cup betting favorite. These decisions are being made with the foresight of what do we need come playoff time? What are we going to be able to do in the playoffs that we weren't last year? How can we find more sustainable offense? And there is a strong correlation between creating off of the cycle and maintaining offensive zone time and wearing defenders down and scoring. It's an important component to a well-rounded team. It's not enough to just have the great high-end players on the top half of your lineup that create off the rush, that odd man rushes, the cross-team pass from side to side where you get the goalie moving. We know that's the best chance you can create in the NHL because it goes in at such a high rate. But your third and fourth line aren't going to have guys who have that skill set. So I'll be very curious to see where Trent Frederick slides into this Oilers lineup. I think if it were up to me, I would probably be penciling him in on that third line in the Janmark spot and bumping Janmark down. I would still very much like to see Jeff Skinner in this lineup some way, but based on the fact that the Oilers went out and got another left-handed forward, I don't necessarily think that's necessarily in the cards for Jeff. I don't know if Jeff's going to be able to carve out a spot now that they're going to have 5 left-handed wingers going down the left side, not including Evander Kane, not including Trent Frederick. So we'll see as far as when Frederick's available to return from injury, but there's a whole lot more to get to. We got to take our first break of the day. Be right back, guys. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you, unsaturated fats to keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shell variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, whether I'm at my desk working on the show, in the car, or just need a quick protein boost to help hit my macros for the day. Or if you're old school and you love cracking open the shell for the satisfying crunch, the in-shell option are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. No-shell pistachios have the best and easiest snack taste, and get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out for this bonus edition of Locked On Oilers as we break down the Trent Frederic trade. And yes, I know the Oilers also got Max Jones in this trade, but Max Jones is a 27-year-old with 265 career NHL games played, less than a quarter point per game player in the NHL. I think Max Jones is very much an AHL target. He's only played a handful of games this year at the NHL level. I think that's a player who's only getting in the mix if the Oilers have injury issues or if they really just want to give him a look down the backstretch. So one of the real debates within the hockey media landscape, and frankly, I could say the hockey landscape at large, is the role of physicality within your game and your path to success. Now, one thing I think that's important that I start this conversation with, if you don't have a certain baseline requisite skill level, I don't think bringing toughness necessarily gives you an inside track. Now, if you're one of the guys who's a functional player and has that wrinkle to their game, we're talking one of the Tkachuk brothers, Tom Wilson. If we're talking about someone of that ilk, Brad Marchand when he's healthy, Will Cooley of the Rangers comes to mind for this as well. Zach Hyman to some degree, Evander Kane to some degree, the hard-nosed guy who throws their body around, who's not afraid to hit on the forecheck, who's aware and makes the defenders aware that they're out there. Those types of guys are invaluable because that's an uncommon skill set. And we know the path to getting paid in hockey is to facilitate offense. If you can contribute points regularly, you're going to make a lot more money than a fourth line center who only wins faceoffs. I think when you start to break it down, it's important to understand that teams don't want to have fourth lines with guys who give you 8 points on the whole season. In an ideal world, you would love to feature 12 forwards who all score at least 10, 15 goals, because that means you have the puck an awful lot. That means you're not playing a lot of defense. And because of that, that's going to put you in an advantageous offensive position. And because it's too expensive to feature all skill lineups, teams do need to have these wrinkles where they have strong forechecks, where they can create off the cycle. And that's really been an inhibitor for the Oilers at points over the last 2 years. What can you do offensively when you don't have your game going? When you're being held up in the neutral zone, you're being diverted to the walls, you're being forced to send the puck in deep to really work for your offense. Can you pass 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times to set up one good scoring chance? Can you do that? I struggle to think that a team can get by with only one type of offense, because in the playoffs, offense dries up. Goal scoring goes down about half a goal per game overall. There are usually, it's a common misconception to think there are fewer power play opportunities. They're actually pretty stable in comparison on a per game basis to what you see called in the regular season, but there's less overall offense because the teams are more talented. Typically speaking, the goaltending is better, and teams are less amicable or risk-taking. They're less amicable to taking risks. They're a lot more inclined to opt for the safe play. You want to live for the next sequence. You don't got to get it all back at once. You want to wear down the opposition gradually. You want to start to compromise their structure and put them in conflict. And that's something that a cycle-based offense has a good chance to do. So off of the rush, where you're gaining the neutral zone and the offensive zone with speed, you're putting pressure on the defenders to cover cross-seam passes, to cover an attacking player crashing towards the net. When you create off of the cycle, that's where you can really control the flow of the game. Because sure, if you gain the zone with speed, you're probably going to create a really dangerous chance, because speed is such a useful contributor to offense, because you're putting defenders and the goalie in conflict. Does the goalie know what the defender's going to do? Because as we always talk about, If the defender takes the wrong play in the 2-on-1 and it's the shooter and the goalie, that puts the goalie in a difficult position. Can the goalie get over if they have to play the pass? There are just so many factors that go into creating off the rush that make it dangerous. But when that's not there, and even when it is there, typically speaking, those plays are one and dones where the Oilers or any team really, when you get in the zone with speed, you're typically getting the puck on net really fast. And that typically correlates with the puck going back the other way, which that's okay. You can survive playing a transition game back and forth if your team is situated for that. But when you have the ability to roll a third and a fourth line that can really play possession, that can really wear you down, that is an invaluable resource as far as deepening your lineup. Now, those lines aren't going to contribute as much offense as guys that create off of the rush. But offense is not just about scoring goals. It is about wearing down the defense. It is about wearing down the goaltender. And it is about minimizing how much defense you have to play. And I know people don't think about it in that respect as far as playing more offense means less defense. But when you have a functional third line, a functional fourth line that can actively play hockey, that can cycle, that can maintain possession, that is invaluable as far as protecting the weaker components of your lineup. You want to have a functional third line. You know, I talked in depth yesterday about the Tampa Bay third line that did such a great job when they went back to back in goal in Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, and Yanni Gourde. And that trio, two of those three guys are overqualified. You know, Blake Coleman's been a top sixer since he got to Calgary. Yanni Gourde's been a top sixer since he got to Seattle. The Oilers don't really have overqualified guys. I think Adam Henrique in an ideal world is probably a third line wing now as opposed to a third line center. I think Connor Brown is probably a fourth liner. I think Matthias Janmark is probably a fourth liner. But based on their speed, based on their penalty kill, and their game control, they're over 52% in high danger chances and expected goals. Because of that, I think the Oilers are a little more inclined to live with the lack of high-end finishing because they create some dangerous chances and because of their skill sets. You know, neither Brown nor Janmark is a particularly gifted shooter. Henrique has a strong profile of being an above-average shooter for his career. He just doesn't shoot the puck a whole lot because he's more of a facilitator, but that's not necessarily disqualifying. The last thought on this before we take our second and final break of today's show. I love the idea of adding somebody to the mix with a skill set you don't presently have. Without Evander Kane, Trent Frederic absolutely fills a void. The only real question is Trent Frederic going to play this year? Is he going to play before the playoffs? Because like we talked about with Evander Kane, and it would be unfair to Evander Kane if I didn't highlight this in the same exact regard to Trent Frederic. If Trent Frederic doesn't play in a regular season game from late February through April when the playoffs start, it's going to be really difficult to dial it up and be ready to go game one, round one, without having played competitive hockey in 2 months. That's a long layoff to just expect your legs and your body to be ready to go. There is a acclimation process, a readjustment period, and we'll be very curious to see the timelines as far as a Frederic return, and frankly, if Evander Kane gets dealt before Friday. Speaking of Friday, we're going to take one more break on today's show. We're going to talk a little bit more about what the Oilers' deadline plans might be now that they've added a forward to their group. Be right back, guys. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this bonus edition of Locked On Oilers as we're breaking down the Trent Frederic trade from every possible angle. So I think Frederic presents an interesting opportunity. I think because of his profile, being big, being an above average skater, throwing his body around a lot, I think certain hockey types are going to be enamored with his skill set. I don't think he really fits with the Oilers long term because I think he's going to try and maximize whatever opportunity he gets in free agency this upcoming summer. As a pending unrestricted free agent, the Oilers are likely being used just as much as Frederic is. We talked about this last summer in regards to Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner, the idea that you want to come to a good team chance to win a Stanley Cup, make a little bit of money, audition yourself for a bigger and better role. And once you've played well, hopefully, you parlay that into going to free agency again and you try and get that long-term financial security. That's the goal of hitting NHL free agency. So Frederick, I feel, probably has more functionality than Evander Kane right now because he's played hockey this year. And I know that's not a huge barometer that Frederick's played 57 some odd regular season games and Kane hasn't played since last June. But I do think that matters. I think it makes the ramp up process for Frederick as far as getting ready for playoff hockey a lot more feasible and doable. I think anytime you're getting close to a calendar year without playing, it's going to be grueling. You think about how much John Klingberg has really struggled to get his feet under him so far this year. I am very reticent to think Evander Kane is going to come into a lineup not having played hockey in 9-10 months and look comfortable. Can he be effective? Sure. If he's playing on the third line, he's only being asked really to be a grinder, to forecheck, to hit. Yeah, that can absolutely work for Evander Kane. The problem is, and we know this, Evander Kane's not exactly the most team-first guy. He's not going out there for the team. There is an element of looking out for himself in this that needs to be considered as well. I know Elliot Friedman reported it on Monday that there might be a bit of a disagreement between Evander Kane and the Oilers as far as when he's going to be ready to play. They very much probably want him to return in the postseason so they don't have to worry about him counting against the salary cap in the regular season, whereas Evander Kane very likely wants to play because he knows he's almost certainly going to get traded in the summer. And the better you play in whatever stint you get, the more likely it is you're going to have more suitors, and the more landing spots you potentially can go to, the more variety you have. Now, Evander Kane has a 16-team list that he submitted over the last weekend, which told the Oilers what teams he'd be willing to accept a trade to. And from what Elliot Friedman reported, the list is comprised of teams that are in playoff spots or close to playoff spots because he wants to play for a contender. I mean, my pipe dream is trying to turn Evander Kane into someone like Kyle Palmieri on the Islanders, where you're turning a player with term in Kane into a short-term rental. You're getting out of a financial commitment for the next few years. You're sending Evander Kane to a team that is pushing for a playoff spot, even though they're not that great, that wants to stay competitive, that doesn't want futures, and has an invested stake in that style of hockey, of grind it down, wear it out style that the Islanders have made relatively successful over the last handful of seasons. It was at its best under Barry Trotz, but I do think there's a world where Evander Kane can be a functional player. You know, I would say exactly the same thing as far as Victor Arvidsson. I think you could absolutely find a way to make a Kyle Palmieri for Victor Arvidsson type trade work, where Arvidsson has one more year of team control. He goes to a team that's trying to play their way into the playoffs. He can probably slide into their top six right away because of the injury issues and the performance issues the Islanders have had. But as far as the rest of the week, now that the Oilers have gone out and added at least one forward who can play in their top nine in Trent Frederic, I think they're likely done with that position group. It should be mentioned Frederic can play center, so maybe there's a world where Frederic slides to the middle, Henrique kicks it out to the left, and they try and maximize what Adam Henrique can bring and give him a little bit more of an offensive inclination to what he can bring to the table instead. But I think fundamentally, because you brought in another left-handed winger or center, you almost certainly are trading one of Jeff Skinner or Evander Kane, because if you're going to continue to play Nuge with McDavid, you're not going to play Skinner there, obviously. If you're going to play Podkolzin with Leon, you're not going to play Skinner there. You're not going to play Skinner over Frederick because you brought in Frederick to be a forechecker and a hitter and a pain in the butt, and Jeff Skinner's not that. I don't think you're going to play Jeff Skinner on the fourth line because he's not a defense-first guy. He's more of a high-event player. You would much rather have Janmark in that spot. And then you still have Evander Kane. So with that in mind, Is it conceivable the Oilers plan to play Trent Frederick only at center and they want to keep Jeff Skinner somewhere else in the lineup? Yeah, that absolutely could be the case. Now, I don't think Frederick's a great face-off guy. He's in the high 40s. I want to say like 47, 48%. So it's not incredibly disqualifying. I don't put a ton of stock in face-off win rate anyway. There is not a strong correlation between face-offs, winning face-offs, and possession of the puck, because the way we track face-offs in the NHL is not detailed enough. We don't track whether it's a clean face-off win where the center wins it back straight to a player, if it's a tie and then someone else comes in and cleans up that loose puck. We count all face-off wins equally, and we shouldn't, because they're not equal. They're fundamentally different, and it creates different. They all have different weight and importance, and because of that, because we all lump them together, it's hard to count all of them the same. We don't count them for offensive or defensive or neutral zone. We just have, this is how many faceoffs there were, this is how many they won. So I don't think Trent Frederick being below 50% on faceoffs is that important as far as him playing center versus playing wing. But I do think it is a consideration the Oilers would have, especially for a role where he's probably going to end up being that third line center. So with that in mind, it's another thing for the Oilers to consider. I feel there is absolutely the need to go out and add a defenseman. And friends, I have been DMing back and forth with a bunch of my friends who keep asking, why won't the Oilers go get a goalie? Why won't the Oilers go get a goalie? And I shrug and I say, they don't want to hurt Stuart Skinner's feelings, and the best goalie available is almost certainly getting extended to stay in Utah. So you're probably going to have to overpay to go get one, and then you're going to have to give him an extension after this year, because if you give up assets for a goalie in season who's young and has upside, it would be almost negligent to trade what it would cost to go get Karel Vejmelka and then not extend him. And I don't think that's the case as far as Trent Frederick. I do think a second-round pick for a guy whose career high in points is like 40 is a lot. And I like Trent Frederick. I think he's a decent hockey player. I don't think he's a huge difference between what the Oilers were and what they are now. I do think, like I said on yesterday's show, he's a good specialized target. He has a very specific skill set. He's a good pain in the butt after whistles. He forechecks hard. He hits. He blocks shots. All stuff that there's a perception that the Oilers struggle with, so it can't possibly hurt to try and have more diverse skill sets. The more ways you can potentially score, the better your team is. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please check out the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, hit us with the 5-star review. If you're over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. And real quick, thanks for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NHL, covering the biggest stories around the league with all of Locked On's best local experts. You can check it out wherever you get your podcasts. I will talk to you guys tonight after the game against the Ducks. Until then, let's go Oilers.